The click of Sandra's high heels echoed in the empty hall as she walked back to her office. The office lights flickered slightly, casting long shadows on the grey walls. The building was quiet now. Everyone else had left for the day. Sandra, however, remained, not because she had unfinished work, but because she had secured something far more important than another project. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She reached for it, the familiar sense of excitement surging in her chest as she saw the notification. Subject: promotion secured. She tapped it eagerly. Her eyes scanned the email. We are pleased to inform you that your promotion to senior executive has been approved. Congratulations on your well-deserved success. She smiled, the kind of smile that could only come from someone who knew they had won a battle. The promotion was hers. But as she read the words again, something stirred within her, something faint, something unsettling. The glassy-eyed CEO had promised her the position in exchange for her body, and Sandra had willingly complied. She had played the game, aware of the rules. In the corporate world, women like her had to do more than work hard. They had to charm, flatter, and sometimes even seduce to secure their place at the table. Sandra was no different from any of the women who had come before her. She knew how the system worked, and she had worked it to perfection. Her reflection in the glass of the office window caught her attention. She looked at herself, carefully assessing every detail: the flawless makeup, the tailored suit, the way her hair framed her face just so. All of it was part of the act, part of the carefully constructed persona she had built over the years. She had worked tirelessly to perfect her image, to make herself a force to be reckoned with in a world that didn't take women seriously unless they were beautiful, powerful, and ready to play by its rules. But there was a hollow feeling in the pit of her stomach that she couldn't ignore. She had achieved what she set out to do. She had climbed the ladder. Yet as she sat back at her desk, her eyes drifting over the office that had become both her battleground and her sanctuary, Sandra wondered, was it worth it? Her promotion had come at a price, one that she had long ago accepted but never fully understood. She pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on the emails awaiting her attention. Power, prestige, and the perks of being on top. That's what I've always wanted, she told herself, even as the emptiness lingered like an uninvited guest. Just then, her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from her friend Jane. So, did he finally give in? Sandra's fingers hovered over the screen as she composed her response. Yes, I got it. I've earned it. All the hard work, all the sacrifice, it's mine now. As she hit send, she realized something. There was no one who could truly understand what it took to get where she was. She had traded pieces of herself for success, but in this world, who didn't? The smell of simmering stew and fried plantains filled the air in Mrs. Kemi's cozy living room. The warmth of the late evening sun filtered through the curtains, casting a soft golden hue over the room. Mrs. Kemi sat comfortably on the couch, flipping through a well-worn photo album, her eyes lingering on the pictures of her son, Johnson, from his childhood to his university days. Johnson, a man in his late 30s, with broad shoulders and a commanding presence, sat opposite her, arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the floor. He was a successful man, well-educated and well-respected in his community. But he had always felt the weight of his mother's expectations pressing down on him. She wanted him to settle down, to find a good woman and start a family. But Johnson wasn't so sure. I found a perfect match for you, Johnson, Mrs. Kemi said, her voice filled with warmth and anticipation. She looked up from the album and fixed her son with a knowing gaze. She's a virgin, well-mannered, and comes from a good family. Her name is Sandra. Johnson raised an eyebrow. Sandra? Are you sure? Mrs. Kemi nodded enthusiastically, her smile spreading wider. Yes, I've seen her around. She's perfect for you. I've even spoken to her, and she's eager to meet you. She's the one, Johnson. Johnson's stomach churned. He had heard rumors about Sandra, about how she had used her body to climb the corporate ladder. Her reputation wasn't exactly a secret. And even though he had rejected her advances months ago,
His mother was speaking about her as if she were the ideal woman. His mind raced back to the time when Sandra had approached him in the office, her eyes filled with lust and desperation. She had tried to seduce him, to offer her body in exchange for his attention. But Johnson had resisted. The entire encounter had left a bad taste in his mouth. He had rejected her politely, knowing that the woman was playing a game, a dangerous one that he was not willing to take part in. Now, hearing his mother speak of Sandra as if she were a prize to be won, Johnson felt conflicted. He didn't want to disappoint her, but he couldn't ignore the gnawing discomfort he felt about Sandra's methods. "I'm not sure, Mom," Johnson said, his voice betraying a hint of unease. "I've heard things about her, things that make me question if she's the right person for me." Mrs. Kemi frowned, her warm smile fading. "What things, Johnson? You've never been the one to listen to rumors. Sandra is a good girl, and she's ready to settle down. Don't let the past cloud your judgment. You need a woman who will support you, not someone who will be a hindrance to your success." Johnson shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his thoughts racing. His mother's words were comforting, but they did little to ease the feeling of dread that had settled in his chest. He didn't know if Sandra was the woman he was looking for, but his mother had made it clear that this was what she wanted for him.
Sandra stood in front of her wardrobe, staring at the clothes hanging inside. She had planned this night carefully, as she always did when it came to meeting someone who could potentially elevate her life. This was more than just a casual dinner or an interview. It was her future. She selected a deep red dress, the color of ambition and desire. It was sleek, form-fitting, and designed to make an impression. She slid it on, smoothing the fabric against her skin, and stood in front of the mirror, critically assessing herself. Her makeup was flawless, her hair perfectly styled, and her perfume lingered in the air like a seductive promise. Tonight, she was meeting Mr. Johnson, and she knew that this encounter could change everything. The promotion was just the beginning, but if she could secure Johnson's interest, who knew where it could lead? A marriage, perhaps? A life of luxury and comfort? She had sacrificed so much already to get to this point. If giving herself to Johnson would secure her place among the elite, then so be it. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Jane. "Good luck tonight. Make it count." Sandra smiled bitterly. Make it count. The words echoed in her mind as she stared at her reflection. What was she really sacrificing for success? Her dignity? Her self-worth? Or was it all just part of the price she had to pay to climb higher? She quickly pushed the thoughts aside. This was business, not personal. She had a plan, and she wasn't going to let anything or anyone distract her from it. As she grabbed her purse and headed for the door, Sandra couldn't shake the feeling that tonight would mark the beginning of something new, a new chapter in her life. But she had learned long ago that in this world, nothing came without a price, and the price of ambition was steep. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the neatly manicured lawn of Mr. Johnson's family home. Sandra stood outside the front door, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her jacket. She had dressed carefully for this occasion, selecting a soft cream blouse and a knee-length skirt that was conservative yet stylish. She knew this meeting would be pivotal, and she wanted to make a good impression on Mrs. Kemi. The door opened with a warm creak and Mrs. Kemi appeared, her wide smile almost blinding in its sincerity. She wore a flowing, brightly patterned gown, and her short silver hair framed her face in a way that made her seem both regal and approachable. "Sandra, my dear, welcome," Mrs. Kemi said, her arms opening wide in a warm embrace. Sandra, feeling the pressure building in her chest, forced a smile and stepped into the hug. The scent of Mrs. Kemi's perfume enveloped her. "Thank you, Mrs. Kemi," Sandra replied, her voice steady but with a slight edge of nervousness. "You look even more beautiful than I imagined," Mrs. Kemi exclaimed as she pulled back, eyeing Sandra with admiration. "And I've heard so much about you from Johnson. You're a gem." Sandra's stomach flipped, but she kept her expression neutral. She knew that Mrs. Kemi believed she was everything a good woman should be, chaste, well-mannered, and full of promise. To the older woman, Sandra was the epitome of innocence, a perfect fit for her son. "Thank you," Sandra said again. Her words felt thin in the air, almost as if they were wrapping her in a lie she couldn't escape.
They stepped inside and Mrs. Kemi ushered Sandra into the living room, where Johnson sat on the plush couch, his posture stiff and his eyes distant. His face was a mask of politeness, but she could feel the coldness emanating from him. She had never seen him look at her this way before. His eyes sharp and unapproachable, his lips pressed tightly together. "Johnson," Mrs. Kemi said with a smile, "look who's here. Your future wife, Sandra." Sandra's heart skipped a beat as Mrs. Kemi beamed with pride, oblivious to the tension between her son and the woman standing before him. Johnson only nodded, his lips barely twitching into what could be called a smile. Sandra swallowed, but her voice remained steady. "It's nice to finally meet you, Johnson. I heard a lot about you." Johnson did not reply immediately, his eyes scanning her face with a strange mix of interest and distaste. Sandra felt her smile falter, but she quickly caught herself. She had become so accustomed to playing the role of the perfect woman, the one who could charm anyone into submission. Yet this time, the task felt heavier than it ever had before.
Sandra sat across from Johnson, the low hum of conversation between Mrs. Kemi and herself filling the otherwise quiet room. It was supposed to be a relaxed, easy meeting, but the tension between Sandra and Johnson was palpable. Sandra tried to engage him in small talk, but Johnson was distant. He responded in monosyllables, his eyes flicking to the window as though he were somewhere far beyond the confines of the room. The silence grew heavier with each passing second, and Sandra felt her smile becoming more and more forced. Mrs. Kemi seemed oblivious to the discomfort in the air. She was too busy asking Sandra questions about her work, her family, and her plans for the future. But Sandra's focus remained on Johnson. She could feel his eyes on her, his stare piercing, and a cold shiver crawled up her spine. Finally, Johnson leaned forward, breaking the silence. His voice was low, but it carried the weight of something serious. "Sandra," he began, his tone sharper than it had been earlier. "I think you should know that I'm aware of who you are." Sandra froze, her breath catching in her throat. The words sent a rush of heat to her cheeks, and she immediately felt exposed, as if all the carefully constructed walls around her were suddenly being torn down. "I know about how should I put it? Your tactics to get ahead in the office," Sandra continued, his eyes narrowing slightly. Sandra's heart raced and her skin prickled with the sensation of being caught in the act. She glanced quickly at Mrs. Kemi, who was still talking, blissfully unaware of the conversation unfolding. Sandra's face paled, her mind whirring as she tried to process what was happening. Johnson's words hit her like a slap. She had known the day would come when her past would catch up with her, but she hadn't expected it to be so soon, so suddenly. She had worked so hard to maintain her image, to keep up the facade of the innocent, ambitious woman who had simply played the game to rise to the top. But here was Johnson, pulling back the curtain and exposing the truth in front of her. "I don't know what you're talking about," Sandra said, forcing the words out. Her throat felt dry and her hands shook in her lap. She hated how weak her voice sounded. Johnson stood up, his face taut with frustration. "I think you do. I know what you've done to get where you are, Sandra. You've slept with every man in your office to climb the ladder, and that's not the woman I want to marry." Mrs. Kemi finally turned to face her son, her expression faltering as the realization hit her. Her smile vanished, replaced by a look of confusion. "What are you talking about, Johnson?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "No, Mom," Johnson cut in, his voice rising. "Sandra isn't who you think she is. She's done things I can't ignore. She even tried to sleep with me. I had to reject her, so don't stand there and tell me she's perfect." Sandra's face burned with humiliation, her mind racing to find an explanation, a way to salvage some dignity from the mess that had unraveled before her. But the truth was there, raw and undeniable. For all her ambition, all her effort to rise above the others, she had sacrificed her self-respect, her integrity, and now it was all coming to light. Mrs. Kemi stared at her son, then at Sandra,
as if trying to make sense of the words, but the pieces of the puzzle weren't fitting together. The silence in the room stretched painfully long, and Sandra felt the walls close in on her. The woman who had once believed in her ability to manipulate situations and bend people to her will was now at the mercy of her own truth. That evening, Sandra sat alone in her apartment, the weight of the day's events pressing down on her. She stared into the mirror as though looking for the woman she had once been, the woman who had believed she could rise to the top without losing herself in the process. Her reflection seemed foreign now, a stranger who had become someone she didn't recognize. The same woman who had once walked through the doors of that office with nothing but determination and ambition now sat in front of the mirror, her eyes dull with regret. The events of the day played over and over in her mind, each replay more painful than the last. She had always believed that in order to succeed, she had to sacrifice parts of herself, her integrity, her self-worth, and even her dignity. But now she saw just how much she had lost. The promotion, the power, the influence, none of it mattered anymore. In fact, it felt like nothing more than a hollow victory. For years, Sandra had told herself that she was just playing the game. She had convinced herself that the things she did to climb the corporate ladder were just part of the deal, that it was necessary for survival. But sitting alone in her apartment, staring at the person she had become, Sandra finally understood the price she had paid. Her ambition had consumed her. It had eaten away at her soul, hollowed her out from the inside. She had traded pieces of herself for success, and now there was nothing left. The love she had wanted, the respect she had craved, none of it was hers to keep. She had lost more than she had gained. As she continued to gaze at her reflection, Sandra wondered whether it was too late to change, to reclaim what she had lost. But deep down, she knew the answer. Some things, once broken, could never be fully repaired. Ambition is a powerful force, but when it comes at the cost of our integrity and self-respect, it becomes a burden rather than a blessing. The pursuit of success should never require the sacrifice of our core values. And while the world may reward those who play the game, true fulfillment lies in remaining authentic to ourselves. At the end of the day, the price we pay for success is never just measured in promotions or power, but in the integrity we lose along the way. Success without self-respect is a hollow victory.